Do you know what consent means? Do you know what consent means? Do you know what consent means? Find out who else didn't know what it meant either. One of the most basic human rights for any citizen is the right to be informed and understand what is happening to them personally and for their families. Each day we're tasked with making decisions that impact not only our well-being, but the well-being of those we love. We want to know that we have laws to support and allow us to live fulfilling and safe lives, and that our laws protect us from known and unknown loopholes. The Oxford Dictionary defines consent as permission for something to happen or agreement to do something. Implied consent is evidenced by your behavior. Words are not necessary. When you submit to lab tests and you're asked to extend your finger, for example, to submit to the test, your actions demonstrate to the clinician that you're consenting to that test. This could include nodding your head or showing up for a procedure at an agreed upon time. The concept of consent applies to issues dealing in medicine, research, law, and relationships.
Something in medicine that's really important and that most people or many people really misunderstand is a concept called informed consent. Lots of people have seen the forms that you have to sign when you undergo surgery or some other kind of procedure, and people assume that that's what it's all about. It's just some kind of waiver form so that the hospital protects itself. If anything bad happens to you, well, they disclose it to you, and therefore you have no legal case. That's totally wrong. What informed consent is about is really a right that all patients have, and that is a right just to know the important facts about any kind of medical treatment that they're going to have, so that they can decide, the patient can decide whether or not to undergo that treatment. And that decision can include whether or not to pick this particular doctor or go to some other hospital or doctor. We rely on the disclosures and the communications from the doctors, the nurses, the hospitals to tell us what we need to know so we can make intelligent choices. That's what informed consent is all about. And it's often violated by doctors, hospitals who want a patient's business, and so maybe they won't tell them, hey, I don't have much experience doing what I'm about to propose to do on you. Do you want to go ahead and do it anyway, or would you rather have somebody more experienced for the same price? Now, if somebody learned that, of course, they'd say, hey, I think I'll vote with my feet and try somebody down the road. But a lot of patients just don't think to ask these questions because they just assume that the doctor's going to be totally forthcoming. Actually, the law does put the burden on the doctor, on the hospital, to tell you the important stuff you need to know. It's not a situation where you've got to figure out the right questions to ask. It's their burden to tell you, but it's a misunderstood thing that a lot of people fail to exercise their right to informed consent.
Some examples of procedures that require informed consent would include anesthesia if you're receiving a biopsy, a blood transfusion, chemotherapy, radiation, certain blood tests, certainly surgery, and vaccinations. Just note that you're required to be communicated with in terms of procedures, and if there's a failure to do that, that is considered battery. Substituted consent could apply if, for example, there is a durable power of attorney or advance directives because the person has become incapacitated. They could have Alzheimer's. You could be an appointed guardian, the guardian ad litem, or the actual guardian, because the person is incapacitated and cannot make those types of decisions on their own. Then you would serve in a substituted consent capacity. Expressed consent is really just that. You are either expressing approval with a written document, a consent form, or when you're meeting with your provider, you're actually telling them, yes, I'm having a conversation with you and I am agreeing to that procedure. In the case of Moore versus Williams in 1905, Ms. Moore had consented to have surgery on her right ear after discovering portions of her ear were diseased. She discussed her condition with her family doctor and agreed to have surgery to remove the affected part of her right ear. Once in surgery, the surgeon noted the diseased portion of the ear was not as bad as originally thought and instead felt the left ear was in worse condition and should be operated on. Ms. Moore sued because she said she did not give consent to operate on her left ear. A jury awarded her $14,000, and in today's dollars, that would be the equivalent of $500,000. At the time, the judge thought the award was too excessive and set the award aside, but needless to say, both sides appealed. The Minnesota Supreme Court ruled in Ms. Moore's favor. In essence, touching is unlawful if not consented to. The intention of the other party is irrelevant. The practice of American eugenics, which was the proliferation of compulsory sterilization laws adopted by over 30 states, led to more than 60,000 sterilizations of disabled and socially disadvantaged groups living in the margins of society. According to Jessica Pierce, Charles Davenport believed that undesirable traits like criminality, poverty, and disability were genetic, and that in order to improve society, those individuals should not be permitted to procreate more undesirables. He was so impassioned by this belief that he sought out wealthy benefactors to support his eugenics campaign. By 1907, Indiana would adopt laws, and 30 additional states would follow. This practice continued until the 1970s. Fannie Lou Hamer was a victim of these sterilization practices and eventually would become celebrated for her work on voters' registration, civil, and human rights. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service recruited poor black sharecroppers to be test subjects in their study on syphilis. The study that was originally intended to last 6 months ended up lasting 40 years. The participants were never informed of their diagnosis, nor were they offered treatment. The impact of the depression impacted the financial resources for the study, resulting in lost funding. And when this happened, the research team could no longer afford treatments for the study participants. The Public Health Service decided to change the scope of the study to assessing how syphilis ravaged African American males. And the researchers were aware there was an effective treatment at the time, but they withheld the treatment as they watched the devastating effects of untreated syphilis. Dr. Taleo Farrell Clark is credited with starting the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. Dr. Eugene Dibble was the medical director of John Andrews Hospital located at Tuskegee. He is said to have influenced the hospital president into participating in these studies so that John Andrews Hospital would receive research credit for their participation in the study. Dr. Dibble was influential in recruiting local physicians and residents to participate. But as for his role in the study, there was a belief that class had just as much to do with this as race, because as an affluent black physician, he was unable to identify with poor black sharecroppers and was more concerned with proving to his white colleagues his ability to oversee groundbreaking research. Nurse Eunice Rivers and her role in the study is perplexing to many as well. While she was noted as having extreme dedication to the study participants and their families, there is great discomfort in knowing the significant role she played in recruiting and being part of such an elaborate deception for 40 years. It was thought by many that she too was a victim and that she either didn't understand her complicity or didn't feel empowered to speak up. Peter Buxton, a new staff member of the Public Health Service, would file 2 complaints, the first in 1966 and a subsequent complaint in 1968, but his concerns went ignored, so he eventually would leak the story to the Associated Press, and the study was terminated shortly thereafter. Here we actually have the actual 1972 memo from the Assistant Secretary of Health to the Director of the Center for Disease Control ordering the termination of the Tuskegee syphilis study. In all, 600 men participated in the study. By the time experiments were terminated, only 74 of the original participants had survived. 40 wives of test participants had contracted syphilis, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis.
Now I'd like to introduce the next speaker, a very special person, Mr. Herman Shaw, one of our honored guests and a participant in the Tuskegee syphilis study. Mr. Shaw was an original participant in the study, and he participated for 40 years. He was married to Fannie Mae Greathouse for 62 years. They have 2 children, both college graduates. He has 6 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild. And he told me last night that for the last 52 years, he has been driving his tractor, and he already has his garden in place for this year. Welcome, Mr. Herman Shaw.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. On behalf of all the survivors who have today and those who could not attend, and on behalf of their heirs, my fellow participants who have died, I wish to thank Mr. President Clinton. Thank you very much for inviting us to the White House. It has been over 65 years since we entered the program. We are delighted today to close this very tragic and painful chapter in our lives. We were treated unfairly, to some extent, like guinea pigs. We were not pigs. We were not dancing boys as we were projected in the movie on Miss Evers' Boys. We were all hard-working men and not boys, and citizens of the United States. The wounds that were inflicted upon us cannot be undone. I'm saddened today to think of those who did not survive and whose families will forever live with the knowledge that their death and suffering was preventable. Mr. President, we too also want to thank our lawyer, Attorney Fred Gray, who has been with us during these 25 years and helped us to make this ceremony is important, has become the damage done by the Tuskegee study is much deeper than the wounds any of us may have suffered. It speaks to our faith in government and the ability of medical science to serve as a force for good. As I said, at the press conference in Shiloh Baptist Church in Otsauga, Alabama, on April the 8th. In addition to the apology, we want to construct a Tuskegee Permanent Memorial, a place where our children, grandchildren, will be able to see the contribution that we and others made to this country. I'm glad that I have help from the Tuskegee Human Rights Multiple Center, which will be for the purpose of creating such a lasting memorial. In my opinion, it is never too late to work to restore faith and trust. So a quarter of a century after the study ended, President Clinton, decision gathered us here to allow us to finally put this horrible nightmare behind us as a nation, a most welcome decision. In order for America to reach its full potential, we must truly be one America, black, red, white together, trusting each other, caring for each other, and never allowing the kind of tragedy which has happened to us in Tuskegee study to ever happen again. Mr. President, words cannot express my gratitude to you for bringing us here today, for doing so, doing your best to right this wrong tragedy, and to resolve the American should never again allow such an event to occur again. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the President of the United States of America.
Ladies and gentlemen, on Sunday, Mr. Shaw will celebrate his 95th birthday. I would like to recognize the other survivors who are here today and their families. Mr. Charlie Pollard is here. Mr. Carter Howard. Mr. Fred Simmons. Mr. Simmons just took his first airplane ride. He reckons he's about 110 years old, so I think it's time for him to take a chance or two. I'm glad he did. And Mr. Frederick Moss, thank you, sir. Thank you, all of you. I would also like to ask three family representatives who are here. Sam Donor is represented by his daughter, Gwendolyn Cox. Thank you, Gwendolyn. Ernest Hendon, who is watching in Tuskegee, is represented by his brother, North Hendon. Thank you, sir, for being here. And George Key is represented by his grandson, Christopher Monroe. Thank you, Chris. I also acknowledge the families, community leaders, teachers, and students watching today by satellite from Tuskegee. The White House is the people's house. We are glad to have all of you here today. I thank Dr. David Satcher for his role in this. I thank Congresswoman Waters and Congressman Hilliard, Congressman Stokes, the entire Congressional Black Caucus, Dr. Satcher, members of the Cabinet who are here, Secretary Herman, Secretary Slater, a great friend of freedom, Fred Gray. Thank you for fighting this long battle all these long years. The 8 men who are survivors of the syphilis study at Tuskegee are a living link to a time not so very long ago that many Americans would prefer not to remember, but we dare not forget. It was a time when our nation failed to live up to its ideals, when our nation broke the trust with our people that is the very foundation of our democracy. It is not only in remembering that shameful past that we can make amends and repair our nation, but it is in remembering that past that we can build a better present and a better future. And without remembering it, we cannot make amends and we cannot go forward. So today, America does remember the hundreds of men used in research without their knowledge and consent. We remember them and their family members. Men who were poor and African American, without resources and with few alternatives. They believed they had found hope when they were offered free medical care by the United States Public Health Service. They were betrayed. Medical people are supposed to help when we need care, but even once a cure was discovered, they were denied help and they were lied to by their government. Our government is supposed to protect the rights of its citizens. Their rights were trampled upon. 40 years, hundreds of men betrayed, along with their wives and children, along with a community in Macon County, Alabama, the city of Tuskegee, the fine university there, and the larger African American community. The United States government did something that was wrong, deeply, profoundly, morally wrong. It was an outrage to our commitment to integrity and equality for all our citizens. To the survivors, to the wives and family members, the children and the grandchildren, I say what you know. No power on earth can give you back the lives lost, the pain suffered, the years of internal torment and anguish. What was done cannot be undone, but we can end the silence. We can stop turning our heads away. We can look at you in the eye and finally say, on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry. The American people are sorry for the loss, for the years of hurt. You did nothing wrong, but you were grievously wronged. I apologize, and I am sorry that this apology has been so long in coming. To Macon County, to Tuskegee, to the doctors who have been wrongly associated with the events there, you have our apology as well. To our African American citizens, I am sorry that your federal government orchestrated a study so clearly racist. That can never be allowed to happen again. It is against everything our country stands for. and what we must stand against is what it was. So let us resolve to hold forever in our hearts and minds the memory of a time not long ago in Macon County, Alabama, so that we can always see how adrift we can become when the rights of any citizens are neglected, ignored, and betrayed. And let us resolve here and now to move forward together. The legacy of the study at Tuskegee has reached far and deep in ways that hurt our progress and divide our nation. We cannot be one America when a whole segment of our nation has no trust in America. An apology is the first step, and we take it with a commitment to rebuild that broken trust. We can begin by making sure there is never again another episode like this one. We need to do more to ensure that medical research practices are sound and ethical, and that researchers work more closely with communities. Today, I would like to announce several steps to help us achieve these goals. First, we will help to build that lasting memorial at Tuskegee. The school, founded by Booker T. Washington, distinguished by the renowned scientist George Washington Carver, and so many others who advanced the health and well-being of African Americans and all Americans, is a fitting site. The Department of Health and Human Services will award a planning grant so the school can pursue establishing a Center for Bioethics in Research and Healthcare. The center will serve as a museum of the study and support efforts to address its legacy and strengthen bioethics training. Second, we commit to increase our community involvement so that we may begin restoring lost trust. The study at Tuskegee served to sow distrust of our medical institutions, especially where research is involved. Since the study was halted, abuses have been checked by making informed consent and local review mandatory in federally funded and mandated research. Still, 25 years later, many medical studies have little African American participation, and African American organ donors are few. This impedes efforts to conduct promising research and to provide the best health care to all our people, including African Americans. So today I'm directing the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Donna Shalala, to issue a report in 180 days about how we can best involve communities, especially minority communities, in research and health care. Every American group must be involved in medical research in ways that are positive. We have put the curse behind us. Now we must bring the benefits to all Americans. Third, we commit to strengthen researchers' training in bioethics. We are constantly working on making breakthroughs in protecting the health of our people and in vanquishing diseases. But all our people must be assured that their rights and dignity will be respected as new drugs, treatments, and therapies are tested and used. So I am directing Secretary Shalala to work in partnership with higher education to prepare training materials for medical researchers. They will be available in a year. They will help researchers build on core ethical principles of respect for individuals, justice, and informed consent, and advise them on how to use these principles effectively in diverse populations. Fourth, to increase and broaden our understanding of ethical issues in clinical research, we commit to providing postgraduate fellowships to train bioethicists, especially among African Americans and other minority groups. HHS will offer these fellowships beginning in September of 1998 to promising students enrolled in bioethics graduate programs. And finally, by executive order, I am also today extending the charter of the National Bioethics Advisory Commission to October of 1999. The need for this commission is clear. We must be able to call on the thoughtful, collective wisdom of experts and community representatives to find ways to further strengthen our protections for subjects in human research. We face a challenge in our time. Science and technology are rapidly changing our lives with the promise of making us much healthier, much more productive, and more prosperous. But with these changes, we must work harder to see that as we advance, we don't leave behind our conscience. No ground is gained, and indeed much is lost, if we lose our moral bearings in the name of progress. The people who ran the study at Tuskegee diminished the stature of man by abandoning the most basic ethical precepts. They forgot their pledge to heal and repair. They had the power to heal the survivors and all the others, and they did not. Today, all we can do is apologize. But you have the power. For only you, Mr. Shaw, the others who are here, the family members who are with us in Tuskegee, only you have the power to forgive. Your presence here shows us that you have chosen a better path than your government did so long ago. You have not withheld the power to forgive. I hope today and tomorrow, every American will remember your lesson and live by it. Thank you, and God bless you.
If people are judged by their worst moments, there would be no reason for hope. The Henrietta Lacks story is one of man's worst moments in the human treatment of others. Lacks was born Loretta Pleasant and changed her name to Henrietta. Later, after marrying David Lacks, their family would move north as many did during the migration, settling in Baltimore with their 2 children. In January of 1951, Henrietta left her home for a gynecological appointment at Johns Hopkins Hospital after complaining of pain and bleeding. In February of 1951, Henrietta would be diagnosed with cervical cancer. Her doctor immediately scheduled her for treatment. She would be presented with a non-descriptive general permit to operate. At that time, Hopkins was treating all malignant carcinomas with radium. After Henrietta was unconscious, her physician took tissue samples from her cervix and gave them to researcher Dr. George Gay. Gay and his wife took Henrietta's cells to attempt to grow them. They were mildly optimistic as they had had significant failures before. But Henrietta's cells not only grew, they began to multiply and grow exponentially. He couldn't recall Henrietta's name, so he called the cells HeLa, or HE for Henrietta and LA for Lacks. Cells were shipped to researchers in Texas, India, New York, Amsterdam, and Chile, just to name a few. These cells gave scientists the raw material to do experiments too dangerous to perform on human subjects. Her condition continued to deteriorate. The researcher who had stolen her cells had told people that he told Henrietta that her sacrifice would save many people. But there was no account that they'd ever met or that he had ever visited her. Henrietta eventually succumbed to cancer, but her cells would become one of the most significant medical breakthroughs of her time, as they were used to develop the polio vaccine, in the study of leukemia, in the studies to look at the effects of zero gravity in space, the AIDS virus, and cancer studies worldwide. While it is true that Henrietta did not give consent to use her tissue, there were no laws against that practice in 1951. In fact, tissue donors retain no rights to donated tissue after it leaves the body. Today, the price of a HeLa cell is about $40 to $1,000 per vial, And there are two biotech companies that have just recently agreed to finally make undisclosed contributions to the Lacks Family Foundation. Additionally, the National Institute of Health reached an agreement with the family to restrict the unmeasured distribution and access to Henrietta's complete DNA sequence until after review by a panel. The Me Too movement, started by Tawana Burke, was a wake-up call to bring awareness to the pervasiveness of sexual assault and harassment. Consent is an essential element in relationships and must be clear, voluntary, ongoing, and coherent. Finally, the word no has been redefined as many perpetrators looked at no as a form of female seduction. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men in the United States will experience sexual violence in their lifetime. Married and committed couples are also expected to respect boundaries because assault occurs in those relationships as well. The consequences of not knowing, not caring, and not understanding can be life-changing. The Me Too movement has resulted in some significant consequences for high-profile individuals. Dr. Larry Nassar, the USA Gymnastics team doctor, was convicted of sexual assault under the guise of performing legitimate medical procedures. Harvey Weinstein was sentenced to 23 years in prison. He was found guilty of third-degree rape and guilty of first-degree criminal sexual acts. America's Dad, Bill Cosby, was convicted on 3 counts of aggravated assault for drugging and sexually assaulting a woman. His conviction was overturned because the prior prosecutor made him a plea deal that the current prosecutor didn't want to keep. I think what's sad about this case is that the prosecutor was willing to make a side deal at the expense of the victim, and as a result of that, the conviction had to be overturned. Now, of course, we saw some other falls from grace, not resulting in conviction, but resulting in significant job loss and just professional humiliation. I think when we look at the statistics for sexual assault on college campuses, these numbers are alarming. This is the time when many young adults leave home for the first time and begin to experience adulthood on their own. For many, the access to alcohol and drugs plays a major role. What continues to be a concern is that race matters in terms of allegations of sexual assault and convictions. Black male arrests and accusations are staggering. Convictions also place them on sexual offender registries disproportionately. While Me Too is certainly controversial, it has been a catalyst to real change in identifying and reporting sexual assault and harassment. Companies, individuals who hid behind non-disclosure agreements are now finding these type of agreements will become illegal when it comes to sexual harassment. Victims will be able to receive restitution, while states introduce changes to protect more workers. A defense fund has also been started to assist plaintiffs with legal filings, fees, and Congress has streamlined reporting processes by eliminating a 3-month waiting period requiring mediation and counseling before filing suit. Additionally, public monies would no longer be used to fund harassment settlement agreements. In 2018, taxpayers funded $300,000 in harassment settlements.